as well. That wail was from our very own Winston, who is nearing 11 months old. Some of you know the story, but on his birthday, when he was born into the world, it was just me, Winston, and the head nurse. Um, and the head nurse told me Winston needed to get pricked to draw some blood to do some testing. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be quite traumatic for him. You know, here he is introduced into the world, and surprise, we got to prick your foot. And so, for some reason, in that moment, this hymn came to mind. It is well with my soul. And so I started humming it. And as I started humming the first few bars, the head nurse began singing the lyrics to the hymn. Can you believe it? And so as we got to the chorus, we were serenading Winston with, it is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul, just like we did today. And as we finished, the head nurse said, I wake up to that song every morning. It turns out she uses that as her alarm clock to wake up. And so it worked on his birthday when he was born, but it certainly didn't work the first time we sang it in a worship service. So sorry, Winston. That hymn is meant to calm you down and give you peace. Maybe you'll grow into accepting that and receiving that in your life. Our gospel reading for today continues actually on our journey through the 4th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. If you were here last week, you would have heard some stories that Jesus is telling. He tells these stories that are in the form of parables. They're learning lessons. And so a great crowd has gathered to come hear him teach. Even at this early stage in Mark, his acclaim has grown. He's done healings, he's cast demons out of people, done work on the Sabbath, and he's teaching with authority, and so people want to hear Jesus, and they crowd around him, and he's teaching off the shore on the boat, and he's provided these lessons that say, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. If you just have a tiny bit of faith, God is the one that provides the growth, and so if you trust the process, it'll grow into a fullness. And so this is after the crowds have gone. And so this is the scene. This is where we find or pick up the story here in the middle of the 4th chapter of Mark. As it is the reading of the Lord's gospel, would you please rise as you are able for the hearing of it? So this is Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, that same day, he's been teaching folks. When evening had come, darkness had settled, he said to them, the disciples, let us go across to the other side. They're on the Sea of Galilee, and the other side is foreign territory, Gentile territory. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into that boat. So that boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? The word of God for the people of God this morning. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Would you pray with me? God, you who are almighty, you who order even the chaos that threatens to overwhelm and sink us. Um, would you seep into our hearts this morning? Just as you are, meet us just as we are. In our places of fear, in our places of disbelief, in our places of lack of trust. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The readings this week are so vivid, I think. It was very interesting scenes that we have. You know, we just heard about the disciples. They are caught out at sea, and a great storm has caught them. You know, if you remember, who were the disciples, the initial disciples? Do you remember their profession? They were fishermen. That's right. Yeah. So for a bunch of fishermen who are used to the sea, to be that freaked out that they have to wake the sleeping Jesus, it says something. You know, that this is a really great storm. It's a severe storm, and they know the danger is very real, and that severe windstorm that is pushing the waves into the boat, threatening to capsize the very vessel that they're traveling in, that this is a very real and present danger. And yeah, it's interesting. If I were one of those disciples, in waking Jesus up, I'd be a little angry. I'd be a little bitter, because whose idea was it to go to the other side? You guys remember? Yeah, it was Jesus' idea. Jesus, you are sleeping through the storm, and you're the one that led us into it. You know, whose brilliant idea was it to go across to the other side? This foreign, unfamiliar territory to them. You know, but it's Jesus who has brought them out into the deeper waters to encounter this scenario where even for the seasoned fishermen among them, they feel out of their depth, right? That things are out of their control. And we had Roger read for us from the letter to the Corinthians, from 2 Corinthians. This peculiar text. I'm so glad that you pointed us to it, Roger, in our Pew Bibles. But this passage really stood out for me when Paul writes, "As servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way, through great endurance, in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger." These are servants of God. Paul and his missionary partners who are doing God's work, living holy lives, right? Living dedicated lives for the service of God, trying to share God's gospel, doing all the right things, and yet, what is Paul mentioning? These severe storms that they've had to endure through their lives. And I don't know about you, but a question that comes to mind is, what gives? What is going on, Jesus? And it also reminds me of a quote that's attributed to Saint Teresa of Avila, the Spanish mystic from the 16th century, who was the namesake for the Mother Teresa that we're well acquainted with, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who worked in India. Now, Saint Teresa is said to have commented after surviving a harrowing journey where she was caught in flash floods, threatened, really, a real threat of drowning, she and members of her party. Some other accounts say that, you know, these rains had gotten their carriage stuck in the mud, but others say that, you know, they were traveling by foot and these flash floods had wiped out the path that they were on, and every step could have led to them going and being caught in the sweeping waters. And when they had gotten through, St. Teresa is said to have said, "Lord, when will you stop putting obstacles in my way?" To which she heard Jesus say to her, "This is how I treat my friends." To which she replied, "If this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few." Okay? So, what gives, Jesus? Don't you care? Don't you know my heart? Don't you know I'm trying to do what you have set me to do? Can't you see that in following you, you have put us into scenarios where we are way over our heads, that we are drowning. Where we are right now, it feels like things are going to capsize. Don't you even care? That's what we heard the disciples speak out loud. Don't you even care that we are dying here? I had the opportunity to visit several friends in different segments of my life. As many of you know, my story isn't that, even though I have pastors as parents, I didn't really stay in the church, especially when I went off to college. I was like the younger prodigal son. I did whatever I could to go as far away from home as possible. And so I have different segment of groups of friends who aren't church still. And now that I'm an ordained pastor, they have jokingly say things, especially when we're out in public. My friend, he's a pastor, so we have God on our side. Things are gonna go okay. We were out at some sports bar, and we were watching some sports, and they said, "Oh, who's Joe rooting for?" Because they're going to have God's favor on that side. And actually, it turned out to be somewhat true this time around, because I've been rooting for the Edmonton Oilers. I don't know if any hockey fans are here, but they were down 3-0 to the Florida Panthers, but they've tied it up. It's going to Game 7 tomorrow. And so miraculously, they may be the second team in this history of the NHL to come back from a 3-0 deficit. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Because I think these friends of mine have this silly notion that if you are God's servant, if you are counted as one of Jesus' disciples, that you will somehow be blessed. Blessed in a worldly sense, that you will reap material rewards. These things that we have in our lives as conceptions of the good life. Now, this is just for the unchurched folks, right? And none of you in here would think in those lines, right? I'd say this jokingly because I think we all have it. We're all creatures who live in the world, and so our understanding is a quid pro quo. If we are following in God's ways, if we are on the boat of discipleship and we are being led into our future, then our present circumstances are going to go well. For me, I don't know about you, but for me, this is what I also think. And part of the imagination, it may not be, the most extravagant, expensive things, but material prosperity and comfort, bodily comfort, doesn't that come with the territory? Shouldn't that be part of our lives as faithful people? At least escaping the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that the others who aren't here on Sunday mornings are availing themselves to by their not so great behavior, right? Shouldn't it work like this? And yet, when we slow down and we encounter scriptures like this week, it's a different story. We hear it in scripture, and we also hear it from the testimony of the faithful who go before us, who are part of the cloud of witnesses urging us on. Their story isn't that God shields us from experiencing tragedy. I've told the story a few times in previous worship services when we've used "It Is Well With My Soul," the tragic circumstances out of which that hymn came to be. Horatio Stafford, who had sent his family to England to be part of D.L. Moody's revival services out in England, a charismatic evangelical preacher at the turn of the 20th century for a vacation, and his family encountering shipwreck, with his wife being the only survivor. That Horatio Stafford, he penned the lyrics to "It Is Well With My Soul" as he was crossing the very waters that had taken his children a week before, the boat captain coming and grabbing him because the captain knew why Horatio Stafford was on that boat and the circumstances in which life had found him. And standing on the bow of the ship, these were the lyrics that came to him. It was so we know from testimony of very faithful people who walk before us that we are not kept free from suffering as we would wish. We are not kept in safe harbors. Somehow, we are instead led out into choppy and chaotic waters, into a rough sea, into what folks might call a liminal space, where things are uncertain, where things are on the threshold of becoming something new. So it's all unfamiliar territory to us, liminal spaces where we feel completely out of our depths. And somehow, this is the journey that Jesus is seeking to lead us into, inviting us on. Who is coming with me? I can't help but think of the famous scene in Jerry Maguire where Tom Cruise, he's got a goldfish in one arm and he's saying, "Come on, who's coming with me on this great adventure that where success is not guaranteed and it's just one person?" Yeah, no one wants to brave that because it's not a path that leads to the avoidance of pain and suffering, which is what we usually do. It's not keeping that an arm's length away or sticking our heads in the sand. It's actually through it that God is leading us through these forces that seem to be swirling out of control in our lives. And God isn't giving us this cheat code through life where we remain impervious to the hurts all around us, numb to the pains that are within us, but actually is seeking to form us anew. The line that really stands out for me from the 2 Corinthians reading is Paul announcing that the day of salvation is here. And salvation looks like this: encountering the distressing things that are both lurking underneath the surface of our hearts, but also pushing in on us as forces threatening to destroy us from without. And saying, I am going to lead you into that, building you up with a resilience that will come, that will be forged through your experience of being led through it, not with your strengths, but by the power of my grace at work in your life. This is the journey of faith, this testimony of this journey that comes to us from those who have walked before us, this testimony that says storms are going to come your way, but the good news is God will be on your side. God is with you through it. That even as the waves feel like they're going to capsize you and bring you under, you are not outside of the grasp of God's loving arms. That it is Christ who is with us on that same boat. And the thing that the disciples do, the thing that we are to do, I think, from our gospel lesson, is to remember to raise him up, to awaken the Christ that dwells within us, to turn to him. He who is Lord over heaven and earth, he who has the power over the forces of life and death, the one who could have remained above the pain, free from suffering of the world, blameless, without sin, didn't have to suffer, yet went through it. Christ who endured afflictions and hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonment, the betrayal of his closest friends, death. Not a noble death, but a humiliating death. Experience being stripped naked and nailed to the cross. Who accepted and received even suffering and shame. This emblem, which is supposed to stand and represent the worst fate that the world could deal onto somebody. The Roman Empire using the crucifixion punishment to inflict and strike fear into the hearts of those who lived under their rule. We're invited to place our trust in this Christ who has walked this journey before us, who is with us in the choppy waters, in our boat, who has experienced what we are being led into, endured, and overcome it. He who reminds us to not be afraid. Those beautiful words that I get to proclaim at funeral services, the words that come from the book of Revelation, I am the first and the last. I have endured these things. I am the living one who has come out the other side, even death, as alive. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And this teaching that he has tried to give to the crowds, to his disciples in parables, this nature of faith in this process, where we become new creations, exposed to what life may have to deal to us, and yet remaining whole and able to come out the other side because of God's leading, because we are within the mighty fortress of our God who is with us. Here he is, leading his disciples on a living practicum. This is their field education. Here they're getting to experience what he is trying to describe to them as a reality. Up here, they're getting to experience it in their lives. Will you trust me when the storms of life are raging? When the world is tossing you to and fro, will you turn to me and wake me up? When the waves of tribulation are crashing down, threatening to take you under, when you find yourself racked with your guilt, with your shame, when you can't escape the howling winds of alienation and estrangement in your life, which are sin, when the brokenness of the world is crashing in on you and infecting all that is in your life with fractured relationships, with the competitiveness that you can't help but get caught up in, The keeping up with the Joneses, he got that promotion, she got that raise? How? The envy, when we come face to face with the frailties of our human mutual condition, this fragility which seems to define the world that we inhabit, where we are subject to tragedies that we don't deserve but still come to us. Jesus' invitation is for him to be your anchor, to be my anchor, to be our anchor. Will you allow God to guide you through this? Or will you remain practicing your avoidance strategy? Earlier this week, I was at a graduation party, and there was a woman with a tattoo that really jumped out at me. It said, "Here be dragons." And I Googled it because I was like, that sounds familiar. But in medieval maps, did you know that in uncharted waters in the seas, they had pictures of dragons? And those were the areas that you were supposed to avoid because it was prone to shipwreck. It was prone to the storms that might threaten to bring you under. And I think much like how we've depicted that on our maps, we do this in our lives as we chart our own course through life. We practice this avoidance strategy of ignoring or avoiding the painful bits that we are consumed by, going away from things that disturb us, away from the troubled waters. And yet, today is the day of salvation, as Paul explains. If we are a faithful people rooted to the gospel, then our testimony is not that God has shielded us away from the harms that impact you. Oh, too bad, so sad, I'm sorry. You just have to practice more faith to get to my... No, it's we are in this together, this human condition together, plagued by the effects of sin, and yet here is Jesus wanting to get us onto this charted path that leads us through it, through these things, in an effort to heal us of it, to not condemn us, but to save us from the things that we usually are living with. It's like our messy, dirty closet spaces that we put all the junk into. This hopeless resignation of that not being cleared up. God is saying, I'm here to clear that up with you. Those places in our lives where we feel condemned to our fate, where we feel held hostage to our fears. This is the path of discipleship that we are invited to go on through the storm, trusting that there is one who stands with us, who is on the boat with us, who has the power to bring us stillness even as we go through it. The one who is alive forevermore is beckoning us to chart a course through the vicissitudes of life that we are usually found ignoring, avoiding, or sticking our heads in the sand to be blind to. Raise him up. Find out that he indeed does care. Cares so much that he does not want us to remain in our places of perishing. St. Teresa of Avila is known for another quote. Not just, Lord, no wonder why you have few friends. She is said to, perhaps in later, as she grew in her mysticism and connection and union with God, she is said to have uttered these words. She says, Lord, either let me suffer or let me die. I think what she's trying to get at is that suffering comes part and parcel with life. And if we aren't being led through those experiences, then we are no longer alive. We remain dead and in places of captivity, trapped to a hopelessness. No, it's through the suffering that we come alive because God is with us. God is the one leading us through it. And God is the one who stands by our side, our God who is in control of both life and death. This God is near. Would you join me in reflecting on this as we sing our hymn of response, which is found in 512 of your Red Pew hymnals, Stand By Me.